Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Prabhupada. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Bhavagisara Sota Sata Sata Shishimad Divine Gajila A.C. Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Bhavagisara Sota Sata Shishimad Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Haridasa Kaur Ki Jai. Premasakaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gopakta Ki. Vrindavan Dham Ki. Mayapur Dham Ki. Dwarka Dham Ki. Munamayi Gangamayi Ki. Samveda Bhaktarinda Ki. Sri Radha Madhava Ki. Ashtashakis Ki. Panchatattva Ki. Lord Nrsingadev Ki. Srila Prabhupada Ki. Go Brahmanandi. All glorious Simul devotees. All glorious Simul devotees. All glorious Simul devotees. All glorious Sri Guru Guranga Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 4, Text 14. Taya, sorry, by the goddess Durga. Abhihatyam, the word spoken. Akarnya, by hearing. Kamsaha, Kamsa. Parama Vishmitaha, was struck with wonder. Devakim, unto Devaki. Vasudevam cha, and Vasudev. Mucha, releasing immediately. Pasritaha, with great humility. Abravit, spoken as follows. Tatchibadhitam karnya kamsa paramam vishmitya devakim vasudevam cha vimuchya parisarot bhavat tayabhitam de karnya kamsa paramam vimishitaha Devakim Vasudevam cha Vimuchya Parisat Bravad. Go ahead. Ladies. Any more? Translation purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. After hearing the words of the goddess Durga, Kamsa was struck with wonder. Thus he approached his sister Devaki and brother-in-law Vasudeva, releasing them immediately from their shackles, and very humbly spoke as follows. Please repeat. After hearing the words of the goddess Durga, Kamsa was struck with wonder. Thus he approached his sister Devaki and brother-in-law Vasudeva, releasing them immediately from their shackles, and very humbly spoke as follows. Purport. Kamsa was astonished because the goddess Durga had become the daughter of Devaki. Since Devaki was a human being, how could the goddess Durga become her daughter? This was one cause of his astonishment. Also, how is it that the eighth child of Devaki was a female? This also astonished him. Asuras are generally devotees of Mother Durga, Sakti, or of demigods, especially Lord Shiva. The appearance of Durga and her original eight armed feature, holding various weapons, immediately changed Kamsa's mind about Devaki being ordinary human. Devaki must have had some transcendental qualities. Otherwise, why should the goddess Durga have taken birth from her womb? Under the circumstances, Kamsa, struck with wonder, wanted to compensate for his atrocities against his sister Devaki. It seems that Kamsa was flipping over before he was assured as a full-on demon, killing all the kids. Sad Garba. The story goes back a little bit about the kids, who they were and why they were cursed. Hiranyakashipu is the great-grandfather, and Kaumaniti's father, and Kamsa, present father. So Kaumaniti's kids were after the same benediction that Hiranyakashipu got. And so Kaumaniti, the next in line, was upset about the whole idea and stopped the whole thing. Said, listen, and Hiranyakashipu also cursed. Because you've done this, you've gone against my will. I curse you, your father in my next life. Your grandfather, Hiranyakashipu's talking, that your father, which will be Kamsa, in next life will have all of you kids one after another and be cursed and cut and smashed by Kamsa. So the prophecy carried on, and so it happened. All the 8 kids were slaughtered. So now Durga makes her appearance, and it's amazing that Kamsa was present to get this happening to him, that all of a sudden this girl, I didn't know she stepped on her head, but that's what we heard. So Durga pronounced the whole situation and manifested her presence, and ultimately that changed his whole, he flipped right over completely, apologizing, and he started speaking all this great philosophy that now I'm not responsible for those kids. Destiny proved really the destiny was showing that they were killed by previous curse, and they knew about that. So the kids were born, died, and ultimately freed from the curse. After Kamsa turned around, he started speaking philosophy, and Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur talks about this in one of his books, that he wanted to disrupt the whole demigod situation. His idea was to kill all the demigods, everyone, non-stop, everybody, all demons, anybody connected to demigods should be annihilated. And so he took advice from his ministers, the more demoniac personalities who were like in his group. And so these demons, all the ones that went to kill Krishna, attempted to kill baby Krishna, were Rakshasas. And a Rakshasa, you may know, can change their form and put on a whole different dress. And so they did that when they were after Krishna. And so they change their dress, and Rakshasas are very happy when they can eat some nice human flesh. And Prabhupada made a comment because there's some relation to this whole story. That Prabhupada says the meat eaters, they don't know what the real flesh is. Because there was a story of the plane crash in the Andes, and they reverted to eating human flesh. He said that's the tastiest meat, and unlike any other meat, human flesh is the most tasty. Now, Prabhupada, how would he know that? So in any case, he equated that to the Rakshasa leaders in our today's society, that they want to assume any kind of form, and ultimately their whole premise is to take over, get powerful, and push their way into the prime light and become leaders in society. And there's mentioned by Prabhupada about there's one personality. Nobody knows this, or a few probably don't know it, but actually this personality granted permission for the rock carts to be built in that plot, railroad station plot, you know, where the carts were put together. And so the transition happened at that time. The railroad company sold the rights to that property and gave it to one individual. And so they addressed that individual if they could take the permission to build the carts. So it happened that there was a meeting at the Four Seasons restaurant in New York. This same person bought that property, bought the restaurant, and was in the process of doing more big things. And so one devotee went to him. He got there late, but there was a paper sign. Okay, you have the permission. You can build it in that property, and ultimately you have no problem. Take your time, do the job, finish the carts, and you're on your way. That person was Trump, Donald Trump. So he got a benediction, maybe by destiny, to do something really good with his life. So he became president. So in terms of the Rakshasas eating flesh, there's a story about Andy Warhol, a famous New York artist who started a restaurant serving fetuses. And so that started happening already, beginning right from the very beginning of time. They started eating baby flesh. I'd like to shift a little bit here. People are now coming back from Chippewa. I want to tell a couple stories related to that. Myself and another devotee, Jagat Guru, were the first ones in that building. We were looking around outside, looking for that street. We didn't know where it was because ultimately nobody went in except Kirtananda with Prabhupada. And so it was a back street near the Jamna Mosque. So I met with Jagat Guru, and he was looking for the same thing. So we went through the back street, found the place, and got inside and met the guy who was in charge, Krishnadas Pandit. He showed us around. The whole place was kind of vacated, very rough-looking place. He showed us there's a water spigot right near the door. And when Prabhupada was giving class, somebody would turn that thing, it would drop and made noise on a tin plate, just to be envious. And I spent time looking around, and he showed us a couple of things that Prabhupada left. He left a typewriter. And this typewriter had a flip carriage. And so the carriage, it must have been the first typewriter ever invented. Because when you pushed on the keys, you had to be one finger pushing hard to get the thing to type. So Prabhupada had that room, and he put rocks on top of the papers that he had already typed out. And he would go up on the roof once in a while, and I went up on the roof and started doing a painting that became part of the museum there now. One lady came and approached me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm painting a picture where our spiritual master used to live and write." "Who's your spiritual master?" And I had some back to Goddess, and I showed the lady. It was Srila Prabhupada. She almost fell on her head. So she started crying. "Oh, Swami, you've done it. You've done whatever you said you were going to do. You've taken over the whole movement. You were promising that you would do this and you would change the world by what you were writing." So she was so knocked out by this, and tears were just pouring out of her eyes. And she was so happy to see Prabhupada be successful and have so many devotees. I told her the whole story, what Prabhupada had accomplished. So in the closet where Prabhupada was sitting, there was a whole big stack of the dust covers that Prabhupada had on his early Bhagavatam books. And Brahmananda said he was the first one in that room. I said, "What's in the closet?" And he said, "Well, nothing there." But when we got there, it was packed solid with hundreds of these dust cover books. We took some, and ultimately they all vanished. So that's my little bit with the Chepiwala story. And back to Kamsa. Kamsa was pushed by Narada Muni 3 or 4 times. First, he told him that you're going to die at the hands of Krishna. There's 3 or 4 different things that he said. But he was alerting Kamsa to hurry to speed up the whole transition. He wanted Krishna to come and take advantage and do the killing. But it was 11 years later that it actually took place. So Narada, being a transcendental, like what do you call a person who invites trouble, devil's advocate, he kept pushing Kamsa. Then when Durga appeared, then also he turned around and he flipped completely, because how could that happen? How can his sister, who he thought was just an ordinary girl, manifest this personality, Durga? And Durga is like today's Jagadatri's Puja, which is Durga Puja in our calendar. So he started lamenting and promising that it was not his fault. It was the process of destiny that these kids were all killed. It wasn't his fault. He didn't do anything. But how was it possible he kills? He had all these so many things that he did. What's the word? Atrocities. Then he denied the whole thing because it was destiny. It happened that it had to be that way because ultimately that's the way destiny works. It has to happen. I used to go to the Jamuna almost every day when I was in Vrindavan. And there's some Jamuna stories. Prabhupada says, whatever floats down the Ganges or Jamuna is just to be pushed aside and take the benediction of those sweet, sacred waters. So when they were watching a lady washing her clothes, sitting in the water, or standing in the water, along comes floating down a little boy, beautiful little son, beautiful boy, obviously dead. He was floating by and he ran right into, just went down river and banged into that lady. She jumped out of the water and just took a flip. She was so shocked, dead body. One time I was chanting Gayatri in the Jamuna, and somebody grabbed my leg with a matted glove. It felt like somebody with a glove grabbed me by the leg. I jumped out of the water. It was a turtle. Turtles, they test you out to see if you're moving. If you don't move, they'll start to bite. So there's a story, I mentioned this in a Russian class, but there's a story, in the Brijbasi folklore, there's a story about a lady in a red dress. So it said that this lady, if you see that lady with a boy in her hands, because she likes to kill little kids and eat them, she's a Rakshasi. So I just thought it was a fable, and who can believe these stories? So one day I'm walking to the Jamuna, and right behind this lady in a red dress. And so I'm walking behind her, I wanted to catch up faster to see what the lady was like. And so the faster I walked, the faster she walked. And she had a little boy in her hand, had a red dress on. And so she came to a little bit of a rise, and as I got closer, she went over the rise. I couldn't see her for a minute. Then I got to the top of the rise, and she was gone. So be careful of anybody wearing a red dress. If you see anybody in the Ganga, Jamuna, be careful. Anyway, these stories go on. Prabhupada mentioned a couple things about the hippie movement. It was it was obviously set up precisely for Prabhupada's preaching. So it was a ready audience. Everybody was pruned to look for something new. Everybody was looking in and advancing with drugs and all that. But ultimately, they were looking for new information, new way of life. They had enough of the old life and didn't want to go back into the routine of their parents. So probably two things happened. The Vietnam War was fought to kill off all the hippies, stop the hippie movement. At all costs, stop this hippie movement that was changing the society. The hippie movement was changing the whole direction of the consumer researching people who were the consumers in America. They had stopped the whole thing. Business was going to flourish only after the hippie movement ended. He said another thing that was mentioned, they wanted to kill off all the blacks at that time. Sorry about that. But the hippie movement was for two things, to kill the hippies and the blacks. And so 99% of the people out front in the war were blacks. There was a graveyard in Arlington just full of bodies. So one of my friends, Radhapati, was a medic in that war. He said people were grabbing him, Doc, what's the use of all this? What's happening? Why are they killing all this? Why are we here? What's this thing for? Has no reason or no rhyme or reason. Why are we doing this? So he couldn't find any answers. He had 400 people die in his hands, and they were blowing up parts of bodies all over hanging in the trees. And so he kept looking for answers about what has happened here. Why is this going on? What happens at the time of death? Because he could see each one of these boys were opening their eyes and they were looking at something completely drastic happening in their face. Something was flashing, they were being grabbed by something. He didn't know what it was. So what was this thing that was happening to these kids just before they died? And so he searched all over. He asked wherever he could in America. He said, you got to go to India if you want to find out about that. So he goes to India. He was to Benares, and he's sitting there on the dock, and some sannyasi came by from the Gaudiya Math. He says, what are you doing here? I'm trying to find answers to some questions. He says, well, what's your question? What happens at the time of death? He says, oh, Yamadutas. And so it was a very plain answer. He knew right away what the problem was. So, but it turns out this guy was a medic, but he got shot and put in a body bag because he thought he was dead because he was paralyzed. He couldn't breathe or talk. So he was zipped up inside a body bag, and suddenly he came back to reality. And where the hell am I? Is this like this death? We're dark and confined in a space, so he didn't know what it was. So finally he turns around, pushes himself, sat up, and there's a guy sitting there watching the whole thing happen. And all of a sudden his dead body sat up and started screaming, oh my God, man, this guy's not dead. So I want to ask a question. Anybody was in the room when Prabhupada left his body in Vrindavan? Nobody. I happened to be there. My wife and I walked in there about 10, 15 minutes before Prabhupada left. And the kirtan was going on outrageous, like it was exploding. And I thought Prabhupada was going to stay. It was a question whether he was going to go or stay. So the kirtan kept getting stronger and stronger, and finally one devotee came around banging on him, Mridanga is gone, his Prabhupada is gone, and everything just crashed. But while that was happening beforehand, I mean, I could feel this, I mentioned this before, that there was different times when Prabhupada had it was 1975 in LA or 76. Prabhupada was giving a class and doing a kirtan. He got up from the kirtan and started dancing on them near the Vyasasan. And this just exploded. The whole thing just went right up through the roof. There was an explosion of kirtan. It was like everybody was dancing and just jumping out of their minds. And so Prabhupada, after it died down, Prabhupada looked at everybody, glanced over the whole audience. He says, do you know who came? Why it was so special today? He says, all the demigods came. Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Lord Indra, Narada Muni showed up. He says they were all laughing. Why were they laughing? Srila Prabhupada was asked. He was laughing because they were watching all these Malacha and Yavanas dancing and having a big kirtan. They thought it was hilarious. So here we are having kirtan, no more Yavanas and Malachas. So in any case, Prabhupada had the ability to summon the demigods by their own will. They would come and be part of the kirtan. Same thing happened in, I was told, in London, Conway Hall. They apologized. Srila Prabhupada, nobody came. We're sorry. We advertised it, but nobody came. What do you mean nobody came? Narada Muni was sitting right there, dressed in British top hat, cane and suit. So, I mean, I felt this energy in the Prabhupada's room just at the end when it was just about to happen. It wasn't just a packed room, all the devotees, but above our heads I could feel this heavy energy. I didn't know where that energy was coming from, but actually it made sense that some of these demigods came in for the witness the last moments of Prabhupada's life on earth. So when Prabhupada left, it all disappeared. It all dispersed. Srila Prabhupada was no more a part of the material world. So when Kamsa denied Kamsa denied having anything to do with the killing of those kids. But Prabhupada says the Rakshasas, they're like fools and rascals, and ultimately they end up being deluded and lose touch with the reality and ultimately cheated in the very end by Krishna. Krishna's message is that to take care of the problems with the opposition, the demigods, are complaining that they're in fear. And the Rakshasa demons, friends of Kamsa, so you got nothing to fear. Vishnu is hiding in the heart, Brahma's in meditation, and Shiva's, he's in a forest. He's just got his own thing going on. So now's the time to kill the demigods. They're afraid of you, so now's the time to annihilate the whole kit and caboodle. So, in attempts to kill everybody, there's three things that you don't mess around with. You don't have any. You don't delay it, and they were mentioned that with the demigods. One is debt. You don't want to be carrying a debt for any length of time. And fire and disease. So if there's a fire in your house, you put that out immediately. And if diseases, you've got to stop it immediately. The same thing with the demigods. You got to stop this threat. The demigods are going to take power, and ultimately they're going to defeat the demons. So we don't want that. I was walking in Vrindavan years ago, and I saw this sight, and it was 10 men walking behind each other with one cane, one shoulder, and they're all blind. They're being led by a guy in the front. And so Prabhupada mentions like that ultimately our leaders are like people in blind, are totally blind. And ultimately when they follow, when they're leading, leaders become blind because they have they have no knowledge, no ability to do what mostly has to be done by saving humanity from death. Prabhupada says, I can do that, but you can't do that. There's a magician that was playing tricks in front of Prabhupada, and that was the last thing Prabhupada said. He says, can you stop death? Can you save people from dying? He said, no, I can't do that, Srila Prabhupada. but actually I can do that by taking people. So Prabhupada addressed that to everybody. Don't be a father, don't be a mother, don't be anything related to children if you can't save them from death. And that's what Prabhupada was doing for all of us. I mentioned in a class, in the Russian class, that actually these demons can take on any, like all the Asuras and all the demons that were with Kamsa, took on different shapes and different forms. And so a demon can do that. And there's a whole group of Nagas, and they can do the same thing. They can take a shape and keep it. The question was asked, why don't they keep the shape and keep on in a disguise? Well, they do. One famous case was John D. Rockefeller. He used to drink mother's breast milk to keep his youth, and somehow he got a hold of that. But when he died, actually, that's the key. When you die, you revert back to your Naga form, your snake form. So it happened that the secretary saw that in the casket. He turned back into a snake, and they closed the casket. And so that's the answer. Those who can take these different forms, they lose at the time of death. Kamsa's friends had the idea that to kill everything related to Brahminical culture, anything to demigods, kill everything, cows, Brahmins, puja, just destroy everything that's possibly related to true religion. Bhaktivinoda talks about that as related to Kamsa, that he wanted to turn material and spiritual into one entity, not to be separate. He was trying to do that. He was trying to make knowledge about Shastra covered, like Sankaracharya. He was doing the same thing. He tried to do that. And he was like an empiric philosopher trying to change the whole mechanism and stop eternal religion from being pushed forward. There's another story about those that die. In Vrindavan, there was one famous case, Gauri. How many know Gauri? Anybody, you know Gauri? So anyway, she's a famous example of what it was like for a devotee to leave her body. She was a famous book distributor, and she came to Vrindavan, and so she was given medicine by Narottam, and she got better. She had cancer, and so ultimately the cancer was cured for a moment or suppressed. She went back to the West, started book distribution again, did 108 big books in one day. And it took Prabhupada's notice. And she got sick and came back to Vrindavan. So, and towards the end of her life, my wife and I were helping take care of her. And she was in her last stages, and Narottam asked her, you got 1 hour to live. He can predict that. 1 hour, and you're going to die. So you have any last thoughts or desires? He just smiled and no. And so she laid back on her cot, and she wanted to be put on the floor, so she got transferred to the floor so that she could be in touch with the earth, or with the room anyway. So my wife is holding her deities, and I'm holding pictures of Prabhupada, and I could see it was coming close to the time she was going to go. And although there's a flicker on the tongue, and she left her body. Very happy, very calm, and a very sweet departure. So it led the way to like devotees leaving their bodies in Vrindavan, with a smile on the face, and very amazing kind of departure. Very happy, satisfied, and knowing what's coming next. Be the devotee will go to the spiritual world. So we're taking her body to the Jamuna. It was like a happy kind of a parade, and we're taking the body, bouncing up and down on the pelican. We get there, and the body is, we wash the body, put her in the river, and put her on a fire, on the wood. So the fire started, and she started to be cremated. And all of a sudden, we started walking our way back to the temple. And she blew up a whole storm. It must have been related to her and her power, because there was a sandstorm. You couldn't see any more than like about 5 inches from your face. It was so thick in the sand with sand blasting. And so that's the story of Gauri, who had such amazing powers, and she was not a very normal person, very unusual. Kamsa kind of flipped around in the first child and the last child. He was thinking, well, the first child, Narada Muni said, it's too early, this can't happen now. Ultimately, it's going to be eighth child. So the eighth child came, and then there's, as we heard, Devaki and Vasudeva pleading and being diplomatic and trying to save the kid because it's a female. What's the problem? It's going to be a male, it's going to kill you. And so then Durga appeared. But he changed his mind. I mean, he turned around, he flipped back and forth. So finally he was being a nice guy and released the shackles, as we heard. And ultimately, he flipped around again. So he knew what was coming. It was 11 years later that Krishna appeared in Mathura with the purpose of killing Kamsa, maternal uncle. And so he set it all up. He had the elephant ready, he had the wrestlers ready, and he set up those obstacles that would be certainly able to kill Krishna if he tried to do anything to stop it, putting obstacles between Krishna and himself. So we know the story coming out of Krishna's book. Krishna and Balaram killed the elephant, took the tusk, came into the arena, and they were overwhelmed by the size of these two giant wrestlers. And so wrestling was very prominent. And there was one wrestler, there was a wrestling pit in Vrindavan near the Jamuna. And one devotee, Kesava, Karuna, anyway, Kesava was a really powerful guy. And so there was one black devotee who was having trouble with the Black Panthers in Rath Yatra in 75. And they were trying to do something to hurt the black devotee. So Kesava heard about it and he was jumping over. And he was a brother of a prominent devotee there. And so he was stinging them, and he was pushing these guys off left and right and smashing the Black Panthers and saving the black devotee. He got into a wrestling match with the biggest guy in Vrindavan on the wrestling mat and broke his arm. So wrestling is something that is a favorite sport in India. In any case, Krishna and Balaram took on these wrestlers and showed them what they can do. They thought, oh, these are just two young boys. And even at the very end, it was like Devaki and Vasudeva, Nanda, they were afraid because they saw that he was being overwhelmed by these two big guys. And so ultimately, they stopped the whole thing and decided they tried to stop it. But anyway, Krishna killed the two guys, Balaram. So Balaram killed the 8 brothers, and Kamsa was next. So he was seeing he had premonitions of his death coming on. There was holes in his shadow. He saw in the mirror no head on his body. He was in the sky. He saw stars. There were double vision. He was buzzing in his ears. He had dreams of ghost hobgoblins and so people being murdered. So he knew his time was coming. So Balaram took care of the brothers. Krishna took care of Kamsa. So took him, dragged him by the hair, pulled him down on the arena, started smashing with his fist. And so everybody was afraid because Kamsa was so strong and powerful that nothing could stop him. All the demigods were afraid of him, and now, ultimately, Krishna did the job, killed him. So, we still got a little bit of time. Anybody got any questions? Got a microphone?
I just thought I might add to your Chippewa story, since I was down there, up there, for the opening of the Chippewa temple. Originally, when invited, I was thinking, what's the significance? I didn't quite grasp it. Even though I had heard the stories of Chippewa, the significance didn't quite register till I got there. And to get to the temple, I don't know if you described this, but you go down alleys that are just big enough for you to walk down, and that's it. It's not like there's scooters and cars, nothing. It's alleys to get to it. So it's kind of like, where the heck are we going when they were bringing us in? But inside, you can actually feel the presence of Srila Prabhupada. It was amazing to be there and to hear the stories. The one story that really got me hooked was Gopal Krishna Maharaj was explaining that when Srila Prabhupada went to America back in 1965, he had 40 rupees in his pocket. And obviously in America, he's not spending 40 rupees. So when he left in 1967 to come back to India to get his health back together, he landed in Delhi and he took a taxi from Delhi to the Chippewa temple, and he used those 40 rupees to pay for the taxi. So I thought that was made it kind of special. And Prabhupada actually wrote the first canto, the 3 volumes of the first canto at this Chippewa temple. So this is a very special, special place. So in 1974, Gopal Krishna Maharaj, he asked Srila Prabhupada, should we try to purchase this building, Srila Prabhupada? And Prabhupada said, yes, but make sure you get it at a good price. So they tried starting in 1974 to obtain this building, this temple, with deities, everything. It took them 37 years of negotiating before they finally got the temple. And once they got the temple, they noticed inside that there were the original jackets that Prabhupada had drew himself of the Bhagavatam.
There was still some left?
They were still there. They were still there. So these jackets that you were talking about, originally that you saw, they still had a few left back in whatever that is, 37, something like that. So it took a while, but the jackets were still there. And Prabhupada's harmonium that he was playing while he was there is there. I didn't see the typewriter, but his harmonium that he was playing when he was there. And the deities, the pujari that was in the temple, and Prabhupada was staying in this temple, sometimes he wouldn't show up. So Prabhupada would do the artik to the deities. So those deities are still there, and they're over 100 and some years old, 160, 170-year-old deities. So they saved the back wall of the original temple, but everything else is beautiful marble inside this temple. But it's definitely somewhere that's a very special place for ISKCON devotees to go and appreciate Srila Prabhupada and what he went through. We heard stories. I heard the stories, but I didn't connect the two. When Prabhupada had a heat stroke, has everybody heard that story? Prabhupada was walking back and forth to save money so he could print more books. So he would walk carrying his books. And one time it was so hot, and he just kept walking, and he just collapsed. And somebody who knew Prabhupada helped him up and took him back to the temple. But there's a coffee house that's nearby that Prabhupada used to go and try to sell Back to Godhead magazines to everybody. And it's a very classy coffee house back when Prabhupada was there. And Prabhupada would, be amongst all these people sipping their coffee, very elegant people, and Prabhupada's there selling Back to Godhead magazines. And he would walk around everywhere in Delhi, back to the publisher, back to the temple, all around selling his books and magazines, and he would use every single rupee that he had for printing the books. So often he would show up to get another printing of his books, and he hadn't eaten for days. And the printer would say, Swami, you haven't eaten. First sit down and we'll give you something to eat. But Prabhupada wouldn't spend any money on himself. He just wanted to print the books. So it's a real austerity that we don't quite grasp what Prabhupada went through to get these books out, how important the books were to Prabhupada, and this Chippewa temple is the example. So I was very blessed to be there, to feel the importance of Prabhupada's books. And so I obviously talked about book distribution when I was there because I was very enlivened by this. So I hope everybody can appreciate just how important Prabhupada's books are and how much he wants us to distribute them, that this is what he was doing. He took every lick of energy that he had to distribute these books. So we should be following in an example of understanding that this is the most important thing we need to do, is to get people to read Prabhupada's books. Because without reading these books, nobody is going to take the next step back to Godhead. They'll be stuck at a certain level of worshiping demigods or not worshiping anybody. So it's so very important that we grasp that. And for me, going to that Chippewa temple, it drove it home, just how important Prabhupada's books are.
Srila Prabhupada, geez, there's a story that goes with this. Before he got on the ship, his son, Vrindavan Day, was with him. And he gave him half the money he had in his pocket. He gave him 40 rupees. He kept 40 rupees for the trip. Can you imagine going to America with 40 rupees? I mean, he had nothing. That's a half hour and having coffee in America. But the same money, he never spent it, and he took back that 40 rupees when he got back on that taxi. And he thought the taxi driver cheated him, but he gave him the whole 40 rupees. I was told that because of the urgency of doing these books, that ultimately you can't let anybody go by without giving them a book. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll try that. So I was in San Diego, and 4 people come by on the sidewalk together in breast of 4 coming forward. I give them all back to Godhead. And next later, I gave them another back to Godhead. And I come back to the first group and take the money. I set a record that first day. But anyway, like you say, book distribution is number one on all our priorities, because ultimately, where would we be without the books? Nobody would be here. Any other questions or comments? There's a microphone there.
Thank you so much. I just want to make a comment. I read in the Prabhupada Leelamrita that Prabhupada, despite his 2 heart attacks, he distributed books to Captain Pandya of the Jaladuta and also collected $20. Thank you.
I didn't hear that.
It's given in the book.
Anyway, Prabhupada's books are more important than anything in this world, so we're so lucky. I had a Krishna book, the silver one, in my studio when I first was early in my career in art. So I opened the book up and I looked at the paintings and I closed the book. I didn't like the art I saw. I mean, it was done in a hurry, and it was like Bharadwaj did most of it. He was leading the way with the art, and Jadharani talks about what happened. But ultimately, this one devotee had some schooling, and he was leading the way. And there's one story about relating to Gauri, that because there was a system set up by the authorities, and when the CC was starting, I got there just as the first CC started. Prabhupada was told an artist joined in Miami, and so he told to ship the guy immediately, get started on the books. So we got there, and the books were just beginning. It was like a couple days into the marathon on Chaitanya Charitamrita books. And so we had to do a painting to qualify in order to be a painter for the books. So we're given this picture of Krishna and Radharani together, and you had to paint a picture, a copy of that. So I have a little bit of unusual style when I start a picture. And so Rameshwar walked in when I had 2 brushes putting basic color down on the picture. It looked like an abstract monstrosity. So he saw that and he just flipped out and said, this guy's not going to make anything. So finally, Jadharani saw the finished painting and said, you got a lot of mercy from Radharani. That's one of the best ones they've ever seen. He was selling them for $2,000 each. There was like many artists were making that copy. He had a business going on the side. Anyway, I got transferred to Fate. I did a change of bodies. Didn't work out. I didn't make it so good with Rameshwar. Anybody else? Srila Prabhupada? Ki Jai. Oh.
Hare Krishna. So you mentioned that Srila Prabhupada, when Srila Prabhupada left in Vrindavan, I also saw the video of his departure in Vrindavan, but I get bewildered when because the things that he has taught us, that, and then Krishna also says the same thing, that you are not body, you are the soul, and Srila Prabhupada elaborates that the dimension of the soul, how tiny it is. But when I try to see his departure with these teachings that he has only given, then I get bewildered that when I'm seeing everyone, but there is actually, he's small, tiny spirit soul, but everyone is spirit soul, but I cannot see that. So it's really bewildering when I try to see this in this way. So how to understand? Because everywhere see that there is huge material energy, and within that there is small soul. So how to see this? How to see these things? And can you tell?
Say the question again.
Because we can see Srila Prabhupada always used to remind us that you are not body, you are the soul, and then he also only has given in his purpose that what's the dimension of soul. It's very tiny. This 1 by 10,000 part of size of tip of hair. So it's very tiny. And
let me talk about that, about the soul a little bit. There's a, I don't know if you know about this, but there's a whole, whether it's true or not, I doubt it very much, but there are clones that are being made. If you got a $5 million, you can get a body made that looks like you, but it has no soul. Now, the demigods or the higher planetary systems are aware of certain ideas like that. And some people from other planets get higher knowledge and higher abilities, and they can manufacture a body, a copy of a body that's already existing, and that body is good as long as they carry on. Anyway, I don't know, but that's one of the stories, that they can make bodies without souls. Can you believe that? I mean, Prabhupada is totally against that one, that only Krishna can make the soul. And so ultimately, without the soul, there's no life. And so we are understanding very clearly the philosophy behind the whole deal, that the soul is the mechanism that generates the energy and does the body, keeps the body moving and alive and functioning. So without the soul, there's no life. And so that's the proof of reincarnation, and that ultimately we go through these different changes of bodies, and ultimately the soul is what transports to one body to another. When there's a heart transplant, also Prabhupada mentioned the fact, he was asked about that, what happens when you transfer a heart? Well, the spirit soul goes with the heart into the next body. And so the soul is very important. And so for us to, and when Gauri was doing books in America, she was talking to these people with the idea of the spirit soul being very important, that she's talking to Krishna in the heart. So we think like that when we're doing books or when we're talking and preaching. And whoever you're talking to, understand that we're all individual souls, but ultimately Krishna's in the heart of everybody, in every atom. There's no place he's not. So ultimately the Supreme Lord is destined to take us from square one back to the supreme abode if we just follow the program. So ultimately the program is very simple. We're following it. We're destined to go back home, back to God in this life. So what could be a better position than what we're in? And so we're in Mayapur, we're in the Holy Dham. Ultimately, our pathway back home is guaranteed. Does that answer anything? Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi.